Welcome. Wanted to go ahead and get our meeting started. It's 4 o'clock. So what we're going to do today is just continue our conversation around the educational planning. Last we met, we had the opportunity to attend the St. Helena public hearing and also have the joint meeting with council and also receive some presentations. It's been some questions going around, and I just think it's the opportunity for us to continue our discussions, whatever is the will of the board that you'd like to discuss or get updates from administration. Then after that, we'll go into our regular executive session, and then following that, come out for our business meeting. So with that, I'd just like to open up the floor. Dr. Boone, anything you'd like to kick off with as far as how you feel we are proceeding with our educational planning, or any new updates that we should be considering at this point?
Good afternoon, Mr. Jordan, members of the board. As you stated in your opening comments, we had the discussion with the joint meeting with council, the followed up with the public hearing on the pathway for St. Helena students, middle and high school. The task force has met subsequent to that also. And so the work is ongoing. We're continuing to collect data that relate to the enrollment piece at Sewell's Point and Camp Allen. Mentioned when we asked you to hold that one in abeyance, that so that we could collect additional data and do some more research on capacity and how best to draw those boundaries to support that. We continue all of the work as it relates to preparation for the CTE school, and we will be coming to the board, after the first of the year to really talk about where we are with that and what those plans are beginning to, how they're shaping up. So that's kind of where we are.
Just remind us for a minute. So right now the schedule is set up for us to be able to begin to take some votes at our January business meeting. I know that the St. Helena feeder pattern was one item we would be considering. As far as the 4 options associated with the CTE boundary changes, is that something that we should be prepared to address at our January work session with considering action on at our January business meeting?
During the, I guess it was the 29th meeting, when we discussed the CTE, we indicated that we would be the process of coming into needing a decision on that around February, the February meeting, so that we could get into scheduling and planning. We need what the information we need is the board's thinking, because you will recall the CTE recommendation was one of the preliminary recommendations. We weren't submitting it to the board as ready for consideration and perhaps moving into public hearings on them. We will come back to you probably by the January business meeting with the goal of what that looks like, and then move into the process of collecting public comment perhaps or other feedback. But we shared some options, and what we need from the board is your thoughts and on those options, and perhaps which direction you have a preference for us pursuing, so that, because all 4 of them have some similarities and some differences, and so we need to know where to expend our energy.
And I know we were just collectively kind of talking about the sooner we can go through that process, the better. So with that, I'll just open up the floor. Ms. Doyle?
Sure. So early next year, January business meeting, the division will provide a recommendation or options for recommendations. Then that would mean we would come back in February and vote, public hearing. Is this all going to happen so that we can do this next year for the pilot program?
The public hearings would occur between the presentation of the recommendation and the time that is scheduled for the vote. We're not asking you to vote before you receive public comment, just as with the St. Helena piece. You gave a consensus that we can move that recommendation to public input. And so that's the same thing we would be doing for the CTE piece, is coming with a recommendation that then would move into board discussion and move into public comment with a goal of board action at this February meeting.
Okay, so between now and February, we would have a recommendation, public hearing, and then board action in February.
That's the pathway that we discussed on the 29th.
And then this recommendation voted upon would then be implemented for next September.
That's correct.
Okay, so that would involve boundary changes, and we would have to solicit students to apply for the CTE pilot program, et cetera, et
Yes.
cetera.
That work, the background work for all of that is underway, and we know that has to be part of the information we present to the board in concert with the recommendation.
Yeah, I just want to be sure that we're moving and that we're going to be opening the CTE pilot with 300 students next year at Lake Taylor High, and that we are all full steam ahead.
We were full steam ahead during the time that we were in Williamsburg for the VSBA VAS meeting. The advisory business board met in terms of its ongoing support for the CTE schools. So all of those pieces are well underway. Kalila LeGrand is working with some volunteers from the Greater Norfolk Corporation membership and some of our team as we think about how we market and how we support that. So all of the curriculum work, all of that is well underway.
And when will we see a presentation on that so that we know what the guts of the CTE will look like?
That's what I was saying. After the first of the year, we need to do that. But we also, a driver for that is how the boundaries look so we can know how to directly market that. But we're readying that. When we do our next agenda planning, we'll be able to define when that presentation will come. It's important for us to do it early enough so that the public sees it.
Yes.
And students have a chance to access it. So that's our intent.
So just to respond a couple of things, so my expectation based upon what we've talked about before is that's why we're having this conversation now. That'll be another opportunity, January at the work session, and then an additional opportunity at our January business meeting or workshop for us to give as much guidance, because ultimately what happens in September is going to depend upon what this board votes on.
Right.
So, the board has to approve something, but in the interim, being able to give some guidance on the four options, I think is important so that they can narrow some options for us to consider, and we can then go to the public and then be able to take some action. But
Do you need guidance from us tonight on that in particular, or you?
Yeah, I mean, that's the work that we're doing, and that's why in presenting that on November 1st, we presented with the goal, and we said there were two firm recommendations, St. Helena and Camp Allen, Sewell's Point, which that one has been we asked you to hold. And then there were two preliminary recommendations. One was the K-8, Lake Taylor Middle School, and the CTA options for Lake Taylor High School. Those are the two that we needed some voice from the board around to frame and shape our final set of recommendations.
I'm going to come to Dr. Robinson, but I would expect that we would provide that guidance at the earliest at the January work session.
So not tonight.
That's not my field, but we'll find out where people are, but I could be wrong. But just based upon some of the questions that were coming back and forth, we'll see how we are, and we can check in before we finish. But if not, then definitely by the January work session.
Yeah, I just don't want us to be a holdup. If today we need to have a discussion point that leads you to pursue two options, let's say, let's have it so that we're not delayed.
Our goal was to, since November 1st, have the board engage in those conversations to give us a sense of direction. So today, if there are questions that you have about the four options, we're certainly prepared to try to respond to those. But we do need some direction, or we'll frame and shape it, and
Right.
we potentially lose time on the back end if we go in a direction that's not in concert with the board's
Okay.
belief and thinking. So.
Dr. Robinson, Ms. Basine, Dr. Gabriel.
Is it possible that if we can come to a consensus, not necessarily an agreement, but a consensus, to move forward with the public hearings between now and the business meeting in January, so we could vote in January, so we could move forward, so we don't have to push it out to February?
Again, February is a reasonable time frame, because what are we presenting? If we go to a public meeting, we're presenting four options. Are we asking the public to vote on four? I think that gets us all over the place. We want to be able to refine those recommendations, and if the board prefers that we just come in with a firm recommendation, we can do that also.
We'll see where we are before this session ends, so. Ms. Basine?
Okay, so just a couple of questions. So how does the Lake Taylor K-8 decision feed in? Because one of the options is, includes that as a boundary scenario.
The lake, it has it as a potential piece.
As a potential, right?
The Lake Taylor K-8 has been driven by the excess capacity that is occurring at Lake Taylor Middle, and that will increase next year should 100 more students who normally would attend Lake Taylor Middle attend Southside STEM Academy. The other piece of the Lake Taylor K-8 dealt with the facility challenges at Poplar Hall and the fact that it has a very high, doesn't have a great FCI. And this, we saw a building that, well, perhaps we can take one building offline, reprogram to a K-8, which would address declining enrollment at 6A, and look at facility needs for the K-5 piece and bring that back together. So that was the driver for that. CTE was not the driver for that. It was just that because we also have a recommendation, one of the options, rather than a recommendation, one of the options includes a small boundary attendance area for the comprehensive CTE school. We also then included, for the board's consideration, another feeder into that, making sure that we have, not only from around all the schools in the city, but making sure we also have some other preparation along with Southside STEM that would make that an appealing opportunity for students who would want a comprehensive CTE. That became a secondary link to the CTE, but not the driving link to the CTE.
Okay, so, I've shared some of my questions, concerns since the November 1st meeting in terms of what a comprehensive boundary outlook will be for our division, because in my eyes, I'm thinking big picture, this fits into that. And so I'm not quite comfortable yet that we have that perspective and that information shared with us. The other piece is right now we have a pilot IT program that's currently underway, correct?
Yes.
And how many students are currently in that program?
The numbers, we have two parts of the pilot. Those who met the acceptance requirements to be part of the dual enrollment for the next set of courses with TCC. That's one set of the pilot. We had some students who were not yet able to qualify for admission to TCC, and so they too are receiving and part of the IT pilot, but theirs is primarily at Lake Taylor High School and the CTE's NTC. So that's the way in which we've done it. Obviously, that will grow, and I can get you the specific numbers.
Okay, I think for me, that information will be helpful in terms of, the any curricular information, how many kids, how many students are in that, and how that's playing out, because I think it's important in terms of where it may go.
Just that reminder that the pilot this year was limited to students who would have been or were currently enrolled at Lake Taylor High School. That one did not do this district-wide outreach. So the numbers are not very large. Just remind the board of that when we present it. That was for that school only. We have not done the district-wide outreach as it relates to that. To your comments about the comprehensive view, the CTE piece, again, we started some of this work with the overview of what the CTE, comprehensive CTE school would look like and how we could accomplish that and what the system of supports would be. We did that back earlier this year. We also have talked about how do we accomplish it, which is what the educational planning is doing. How do we make that building available to the comprehensive CTE school. So I guess my question then, when you say the comprehensive overview as it relates to boundaries, are you saying a district-wide redistricting, boundary changes for K-12, or are you looking for something else within what we're currently doing?
Yeah, I think one of our goals of this process is to create more socioeconomically diverse schools. So I think that the population at the schools that feed into the proposed CTE school could change. I'm also concerned that, as Mr. Jordan stated, included in the memo, that we put forward and publicize and market the CTE program while Booker T. Washington is in the process of undergoing, where we're trying to strengthen that specialty program. So I want to see both of those. I want to see the commitment and the work for both of those things happening, as well as the comprehensive overview, of what we're going to do to achieve those goals.
So certainly, I'm prepared to listen to the board's discussion and dialogue as it relates to Booker T, and prepared to go forward with the board's directive on that, whatever it is. As far as the CTE, I do have to say, we have been talking about that.
Well, I know that,
regularly, and how we accomplish it and how we get there. We'll remind the board that our entry point into the educational planning dealt with a focus on declining enrollment and excess capacity in certain schools and overcapacity in other schools, with the overlay goal of how can we address the schools of hyper poverty and high levels of poverty and be able to accomplish that work. That's the lens through which we've been doing this. And so that's why on those reports, even as you all have asked for additional clarifying information, the next time we update the various maps and descriptions of wanting more information about how that diversity and how that happens. We are using the expectation of driving greater diverse schools as part of the work, how we do the work. And so we pay attention to that in terms of how we reach these goals. At the end of the day, very similar to what I said at the joint meeting, we have living patterns in the city that will continue to create some challenges when we have a focus on schools that are designated as neighborhood schools and changing some of the socioeconomic balances in that unless we do more. We weren't prepared to do in this first round of work that elementary shifting because we were dealing with declining enrollment, excess capacity in buildings, and the constant question of what are you going to do if your enrollment is declining? Do you need all the buildings that you have and all of that associated work? We also talked about what would be some different phases of this work continuing, and certainly if the board desires that we look at redoing all elementary school boundaries, I just need to have that direction.
Just for clarity.
Not our intent.
Just for clarity.
Well, I'm being responsive
No,
to.
but just a couple of things. So one, there's not been discussion about wholesale boundary changes at the elementary school level.
Or throughout the district, period.
Or throughout the district, except where the entry point began with us talking about a couple of things. How do we accomplish socioeconomic diversity, mixed income pre-K, programs that were attractive to all families? All those things were conversations that we had. And the recommendation is that we bring in an educational planning firm to help us figure that out. So we've done some things in phases. So Academy for Discovery got set up, the Southside STEM Academy got set up, and then in the interim there were some regional options that we looked at but never took any action on. But as I understand, Ms. Bassine, within the 4 options that we have for the CTE, there are boundary changes that could be associated with that. So it could be a citywide one, there's a programmatic feeder pattern, there's a geographic feeder pattern. So being able to look at those options and then how they impact the new boundaries for the other 4 high schools and whether or not it is increasing concentrations or decreasing or whatever impact it may have
Right.
is part of what I hear you say when you're
That's
talking
right.
about the big picture.
Right.
And then also, as Dr. Robinson called and pointed out to me earlier, we also said there would be some cleaning up that we said that may occur at some elementary schools or any school based upon the fact that we know that we have situations where on one side of the street you go one way and on another side of the street you go another. So there may be some tinkering
Right.
that may occur in terms of cleanup, but there's been no no discussion whatsoever
say
about
that, but yeah.
wholesale
Yeah.
changes. And I just want to make sure, because I don't
And
want
I
to.
was just, that's what I was trying to seek
Right.
clarity when it said, that whole piece. That's how I was, trying to define for clarity, because I thought what we were doing is what the board
No, you're right.
had hoped for us to accomplish.
We're in sync, but I think being able to make sure that with each of the recommendations, we can get an understanding of what streets are being impacted, what does the diversity look like? Those things, I think, are most of the questions I feel like I've been hearing from the board throughout the process, but definitely since we had the November meeting. So, Ms. Basine, were you finished?
Well, the other piece is a capacity question that I had too, about keeping in mind that, and this may be with Mr. Richter present, but I had some questions about capacity and how the capacity numbers are determined, and making sure that we're in line with best practices around classroom sizes at the K3 especially, and making sure that the numbers that we are using to determine at capacity are based on that research that we know then translates into student achievement. So I just,
So
Yeah.
two things. We have some state guidelines as it relates to class size, particularly at K3, because we participate in the K3 class size reduction initiative. So depending upon the free reduced lunch percentages of a school, we have certain caps that a classroom K3 can't exceed certain numbers.
Right.
So those are the first set of guidelines that we're using. We can certainly go below those numbers, but if we exceed those numbers, then we lose the funding by class for
right.
those.
And I understand that, but even the state is higher than what the recommended class size numbers are. So my thinking is that, and I've heard this through my own professional development at conferences, that if you can't get to 18 or below, there's, you might as well not do it. So if our,
See, the research is, it's only when you get to 12 to 15 and below.
Right.
That class size truly makes a difference in student achievement.
exactly.
Which has a cost
exactly.
associated with it as well.
It has a
right?
cost associated with it, but
Only to pay for that.
there's also the other end of it, the costs associated with not getting students to the level that they need to get. So, we could go back and forth on that. But anyway, if we're planning in an idealistic view, what at capacity is, that making sure that the decisions that we're making are based and rooted in best practices that will get us to our endpoint, which is ultimately student achievement, and not just, cost-saving measures.
So before I come to you, did you have a comment on that?
Just that it just reminds me of the best way to eat a 5-ton elephant is one bite at a time. It would be fantastic if we could fix all of the shortcomings and challenges we face in Norfolk Public Schools. We know that we face a myriad of them, and the only way that makes sense to me is a phased-in approach. And if our goal is to get to the point where Ms. Basine feels, and I think that's a very admirable goal, but we shouldn't stop the process to make it be perfect. We should move forward, set some parameters, next phase, but as long as we keep moving forward, moving the chains.
Dr. Gabriel?
There's a book that's coming out on all sorts of different sports terminology for folks like me who need the extra help.
I can
learning it.
translate for you.
Yeah. I wanted to touch on a couple of the different options that are before us in this transition and the process that we're undertaking right now. With the Camp Allen and the Sewell's Point piece, when do you suspect, Dr. Boone, that you will get the information that you need in order for us to make that decision?
As we indicated at the November 29th meeting, that we would come back late spring probably with a set of recommendations, because the school itself won't be ready until during the 1920 school year, 2019-2020 school year. And so because of that, we still are more than a year ahead
Okay.
of that. So we're collecting those data. We've got to see what's going to happen with the housing patterns there. We've got to see with any trends in terms of deployments and shifting of military families. So we're hoping late spring we can come back to you with moving toward fall action on those issues to be ready for the next school year.
Late spring of 2018?
Yes.
That's what you said, okay. I ask because Dr. Robinson and I, when we were in the construction facilities meeting, they were discussing some challenges about moving into the building and having the capacity. So
Right.
we wouldn't be making any decisions that would bring more students in without, during the phase one move-in of the new school. Okay,
That's correct.
Okay,
Um,
good.
That's one of the reasons that we decided to pull back on, and I think I shared that when I did that presentation, to pull back on the board moving forward with that recommendation, because what we experienced this year was an increase in enrollment when we had several years of declining enrollment at Camp Allen, and we were surprised by that and trying to figure out where the students are coming from and how we support that. So no, that's one of the reasons we've asked to hold off. And the second thing is, because of that, of the enrollment pattern shifts, one of the recommendations that we provided to the board dealt with the phasing in with this fall's kindergarten. None of that is moving forward. We've asked you to hold on all of that. So for the 18-19 school year, there are no proposed changes for Camp Allen's boundary K-5.
Regarding St. Helena, has there been any other feedback since the public hearing that you've received or that anybody else has received regarding that transition?
Certainly. So I've spoken with the principal there, executive director, and others, and one of the concerns that we have is that the community voice was very strong in that, but parental voice was not what was heard at that meeting. And so the team and I have started discussing some ways that we can actually engage the parents at St. Helena into the conversation, but most of the speakers were not parents or of the school. There was a grandfather who spoke of his commitment in support of the school and the grandchildren, but we've actually talked about how do we engage the parents of St. Helena. The community, it's not that the community voice isn't desired, but we also need to hear from parents who will be directly impacted by this.
Okay. So nobody has, no other emails or anything else that for the board to be aware of as far as comment?
I have not received anything else.
Okay.
Dr. Robinson?
Just a quick comment on that. One of the things that we have to remember is that we have to, in our communication piece, roll out the benefits of why we're doing this. If there's a specific reason, which we know from our professional development, our study, we know we need to be able to roll that out to the community so that they know, because it's easy to make an assumption based on one set of one perception, and then it's our job to make sure that they understand why we're doing what we're doing.
And just to add to that, there was an email that I received prior to the public hearing. It may have had, 45 people on it. And I responded to the email and gave my personal perspective on, what I thought about what we were doing. And at that time, I think folks were still responding to the rumor that somehow we were closing St. Helena. But other than that, I know on occasion when I visit schools or if I'm just out walking in the neighborhood, in the community, I'll just ask people what they think, but I haven't received anything formal since the public hearing.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to make sure that since we have the school board account and then, sometimes
Yeah, well,
things
people
get
know.
forward, and I just
Yeah.
want to make sure we have all of the information as we're going into this decision-making
Yeah,
process for next month.
Just so we intentionally put the information out, put robocalls, shared at the public hearings that folks can email us directly, use the website, use whatever means that they like, make phone calls. So that's an ongoing opportunity,
Right,
generally speaking.
right.
Well, I did receive a follow-up email, and that was just in support of what Mr. Carter Smith said, and that was to have the resources follow the children. So it was just a reinforcement
Okay.
of what he said at the night of the hearing.
Okay.
Was having resources, which we need to factor that into the budget planning moving forward.
And on that point, I think we all received an email
Yeah,
from the PTA.
That was the only, that
Yeah.
was the only, I received a email from the PTA board, but I hadn't received, any other formal type information aside from that.
Right, and I did respond to the PTA email and offered to come and sit with them.
Okay.
Their December meeting was really their holiday meeting, so they say they may invite me to their January meeting. But
Okay.
anytime emails come back, always respond.
Okay. Regarding the Lake Taylor boundary options, on the table,
Can,
Oh,
for the,
sure.
for the CTE school, so I know which Lake Taylor.
oh, yes,
Because we
the
had a
CTE,
proposal for
the
K.
CTE,
Okay,
the
great.
CTE. Yeah, I'm not even gonna go to the,
Oh, no, I
Lake
just wanted
Taylor
to know
Middle
which
School
one,
thing.
okay.
That I think we're not even gonna discuss that right now, or at least. It seems like front and center right now is the CTE high school. So right now, we have 100% choice. The other is going to be driven by attendance. Then there will be geographic and a programmatic feeder, meaning that if you are in X program at X school, you will be able to go into the CTE high school. And then the last option would be a sole program feeder. Is there anything that the division is leaning towards as far as something that they feel that will work better for within the division? I mean, I have a preference as to, what I think, but is there something that the division is saying as far as making sure that we can balance all of the students who are going to be at Lake Taylor and eventually have to go to other schools as they bring in new students?
I'll draw you back to the presentation that was done on November 1st, and those 4 options are presented.
Yep, I have them.
We share in there that current Lake Taylor High School students would continue, one of the options, they would continue matriculating through graduation. So current 9 through 11 students would still have a place there. The entering 9th grade class would represent the build-in to the comprehensive CTE school. So that's one of the ways we look at an option of making this happen. The biggest concern, and Tracy shared this, and we certainly, he doesn't present anything that the administration doesn't concur with as being ready to present. The concern is making sure that we are utilizing enough of the school and building that interest in the school. So without a geographic boundary, that's an unknown for us. That's what gives us a little gasp. With a geographic boundary, making sure that, again, those students have choice, as all other high school students do, that this is their interest and they want to thrive in a program like this. Because, again, just having a boundary, and that's not what the students are interested in, then that could be problematic. So those are the balancing pieces that we keep putting into this and how we consider it. But in those, like you said, in those 4 options, the biggest challenge, one of the biggest challenges is the no boundary and making sure we can attract enough students into the program initially. The second thing is no boundary pushes the walls, if you will, of our existing other 4 high schools. And if enough students don't select into the CTE school that year, we face some significant overcrowding at the other 4 high schools. So how does that look and feel? That also requires all of the high school boundaries to be redrawn totally when you look at the 100% choice. Again, don't read anything into my preference. I'm just trying to state some factoids as it relates to this. And so those are some of the challenges with that. And as I shared a moment ago, having a limited geographic boundary keeps some students there, creates some synergy, still has us tinkering with the high school boundaries, but not at the level that we would for without any boundary at all. And the programmatic piece, one deals with, do we designate certain schools that are automatic feeders into the comprehensive CTE school because of the elementary or middle programming that would have them ready. And then the fourth one is a combination of geography and programmatic feeder.
So what I'm hearing is that if we were to do either extreme, it would be difficult. There are some real challenges that would be presented to the division to accommodate that. Either 100% application, 100% programmatic feeder. So the sweet spot would be some combination of
The four.
of the four. Yeah.
I don't mean to
and so,
complicate it, but I'm serious.
But I would like to know the January is going to be here in 2 weeks. And so I would like to know what the board's opinion is on, do we feel like a combination is going to be the best approach? A little bit of application, a little bit attendance zone, a little bit program feeder, those, or do you feel something totally different? Because I think you all need some guidance so that we can continue this discussion for January.
Go ahead, Ms. Basine.
Well, so I think that's, so in looking at it, just to kind of kick off that piece of the conversation, the geographic boundary would seem to make sense, even to tie into what Dr. Robinson said about phasing in what may be at some point down the line, perhaps an open enrollment, depending on interest in what we do with lifting up all the other programs. As far as it being a feeder, based on what decision we may make in the hopefully near future around whether Booker T is lifted up with a science and technology program in it, I see that as being a potential feeder high school. So right now, given that potential, my personal preference is that it would have a limited geographic boundary. Similar to what is currently happening, but that, more on a broad scale than what we're currently doing, but with the intent to phase in and revisit after a certain period of time.
So I was going to jump in, but I was going to, because at some point I want to talk about a memo that I sent to you also.
Right, and I think I was getting ready to.
Okay, well, we might be on the same page because
Right, because I keep hearing capacity.
Right.
And equity, choice, and when I hear those words and I look at all of the high schools and there's no equity in terms of where we are, it makes me a little bit nervous in terms of moving forward, because I still have a concern that we're going to market both of those at the same time, because I don't feel like that we are, I just don't think that that's fair.
Well, and I share the perspective in that, so for me personally, it would be difficult for me to feel good about any of the options if we have four high schools that have solid programs and one high school that is less than solid.
Right,
So
okay.
what I believe, at least what I'm recommending, I sent you all a memo that as part of this discussion that we make, I'm recommending that we designate Booker T as a STEAM school, with the A in the STEAM being the arts, and continue to build on the arts program that's been there, but bring it some focus and some resources, as we talked about. But also, under the STEM piece, target cybersecurity, which to me ties in with the Center of Excellence that's happening at Norfolk State that also has partnerships with Old Dominion and VMASC and some others. And then even within the arts piece, that there be, that the technology kind of focus on strengthening through the arts. So whether it's digital journalism or other areas within the arts that kind of tie into the technology piece, so it doesn't water down the IT program at the CTE, but it enhances the technology, the STEAM focus at Booker T. And so to me, if the board said to the administration, that's our framing, then simultaneously, we can then address these other options. But whether we have a limited geographic boundary, and definitely if we have a 100% choice option, if we don't have 5 schools that have real demand, we aren't really creating choice. And so I think that's something that, I'm putting forward, based upon input I've heard from you all, that we take some action on that.
Yeah, I think the Booker T proposal is great. I think it's right on, and I don't think it's mutually exclusive, so I think we can do it simultaneously, because I think that's good for all
I do too.
to be marketed in a very strong fashion, and we move forward with really strong programs at 5 schools.
Right.
And that, personally, I would go with a limited geo, with a limited local, and then like 1/3, 2/3. I think Tracy Richter mentioned that. A 1/3 that's driven by you live in the neighborhood, and then 2/3 by open/choice.
Right.
And that can still be driven by programmatic.
Right.
If you get a feeder in from something else, so those folks can certainly apply. But I kind of view it as a 1/3, 2/3, but I also think the Booker T is also done at the same time, so that no one's left behind, everyone's moving ahead, and we're rising all boats at the same time. And that, frankly, I'd rather make it difficult for people to choose which ones to
Absolutely.
go.
Oh,
That's
yeah,
what we want.
exactly.
So that they have more
You-
options and they can choose. So, and we're all committed, I think we are here. We need to put the resources to it, which means as we enter the budget season, we know this
Right.
doesn't come
And
without a ticket price.
That's right.
Absolutely.
That's right.
I think that's where it's all gonna end up being, is putting the resources to the vision that we have for this and for Booker T and for, eventually Maury, when Maury gets with,
Yeah, but Maury
and you-
has, we're going to continue
Right.
to invest in that
Right.
programmatic
Right.
piece, even as we look at the facility
Right.
piece. Dr. Robinson?
Have you-
No, I'm sorry. Ms.
Yeah,
Wagner, were you done? I'm
And I
sorry.
have to go back, I'm not comfortable with that unless I see some timetables and benchmarks as to where we are with that whole piece. Because we can say we're gonna market it simultaneously, and we still are just in the planning stage and stuff is not in place.
Right.
But if I can see some progress and where we are, timetables and benchmarks, then I will feel more comfortable with it being done simultaneously.
Right, so just in response to that, so the intent is, if the board can provide that direction, they will go to work. Not that they haven't already been working, because we know they've already been looking at the specialty programs and the boundaries and so forth. We, right now, have, as we said, we're doing this today. We have January work session, we have the January business meeting, and we are working on a 3/4 day retreat like we did last year with the specialty programs, where that'll give us an opportunity for all this to come together and see some timelines and goals and all of that. But, my initial intent was to at least provide some guidance, kind of like what Dr. Robinson was saying earlier, so that folks would know what to work on, versus us staying in a pattern where it's, where I feel
Yeah.
you're saying we are now, where we talk about something,
Right.
but without some real timelines and measures and goals, we're just gonna keep talking about it. And I think we all feel that sense of urgency of wanting to see something moving, and then giving the administration the resources, and then we can't keep coming back. So, we're gonna have to be able to make a decision.
Right.
And like Dr. Robinson said, take that bite and move forward. We're not gonna be able to take a bite and then,
regurgitate it.
you said it, so. Dr. Robinson and Reverend Haywood.
You're fine,
Reverend
medical.
Haywood? Sure.
I'll
Okay.
go to Robin Haywood.
Okay, all right.
Thank you. My question is this: is it possible that the option number 2, limited geographic boundaries, could, at a later date, as we see a configuring of the programs at Booker T and the strengthening of those types of programs that make it very attractive to other students, that the CTE would move from a limited boundary to a fully choice school, 100% choice school. Is that a possibility in the configuration of things?
I recall Tracy said that was
He
the
said he
easier
could build
route,
that.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we build it and they will come, and then we can adjust boundaries. And again, and when we would be doing that, rather than drawing new boundaries for the entire school, we'd only be drawing boundaries for that third of students who are part of that original geographic feeder pattern. So I think that's,
Yes.
you know, once we're fully, you know, in 3 or 4 years, a total comprehensive CTE high school, we've had a chance to look at our applications, waiting lists and et cetera, then I think we'd be in a place. And also to evaluate what's happening with all of our specialty programs again and see where we are. And that way we can make a choice, make a decision if that's the direction we want to go in.
Dr. Robinson?
The success of the CTE program will drive future decisions simply because as more students want to get in there, there'll be more businesses that want to invest in it. So, because this is a true public partnership, it has the potential, and I've said this from day one, the first time I ever saw a presentation on it, that CTE is a game changer for the city. So I would see that being a natural evolution, and especially if we create a strong program at Booker T. The one thing that I would want to make sure that we have a handle on, too, is the resources necessary to provide for a strong Booker T program. I don't want to revisit what's gone on there so far. We don't have the proper resources in there now, and if we're going to make a commitment to do it, let's make a commitment to do it.
Well, certainly that would have to be developed in concert with what the curriculum and program focus would look like and what it takes for that infrastructure. So we would be bringing that back.
It wasn't an indictment, it was just.
Oh, yeah,
it was
no,
just-
but
it was just
I
a
agree with you,
clarification,
yeah.
because we're talking about goals and timelines and benchmarks, and which are great things, and again, I think it's a fantastic program. We just got to make sure we understand the dollars and cents of it so that we can go back and get the funding.
Ms. Doyle?
Did you finish your question?
Yeah, we can go back around, yeah.
So, back to the Lake Taylor K-8. Is there an opportunity for us to do that in this next year with those students going to Southside STEM Academy at Camp Estella for 8th grade, freeing up capacity for Lake Taylor Middle now, for Poplar Hall Fairlawn to go in? Can we do the construction on the building and make that happen for next year?
No.
I don't think so.
The current the current 7th graders, which will be next year's 8th graders, is a large class at Lake Taylor Middle. So this is another one that will be for the 2019-20 school year.
Okay.
Because the K-5 with Poplar Halls, Fairlawn, and a boundary of 6-8 students would put the school over capacity.
Okay.
So we need for the current 8th grade class, the current 7th grade class to matriculate through the building. And then we would have the capacity to support a K-8 there.
But we as a board could still take action on that for that to be implemented in 1920, but we could make the decision this year along with all the other decisions.
You could, if you wanted to do it late spring, early fall, yes.
Okay.
Okay. And before I go back around, so just want to make sure we're clear on a couple of things. So I think what I've noted thus far is, at least in terms of the 4 options, the limited, some view of a partial attendance zone, partial choice is what I hear is kind of where the consensus is right now. We don't know what that
That's somewhere
specifically
around
looks like.
option 2, option 3.
That's
Exactly.
Somewhere
it's
in
a nice
there.
blend.
Okay.
I'm more like option.
And then there is consensus support for the STEAM, arts, cybersecurity initial framework for the administration to look at for Booker T?
Yes.
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 I do
I
have a
would
question
say-
about that, though.
Yeah.
I would say, I would go even further with the Booker T option to say that that is a key. That is a key here, that program would be so strong that there will be waiting lists to get in.
We hope it's gonna be,
mean,
So-
all of them are gonna be.
Yeah, and that will be a key here, I think.
Dr. Robinson, you said a question?
Yeah, a question about, has this been,
No.
how's the process? I mean, and I appreciate the work and effort that you've put in there, but this hasn't been vetted by the community. I've always heard that, what does the community want? We want to provide what the community wants and needs.
So,
We want to get over our skis.
yeah, so this
That was
is
my question.
a framework, and I think just like we said, we still gonna have to have some public hearings on these things. So this was just to try to provide some framework. Now, in my memo to you, I tied it to the approved Broad Creek revitalization plan that's out there that did go through vetting. And then we also know that the cybersecurity grant that Norfolk State has received has a K-12 component or K-20 component in it, although it's primarily focused down at the school division in South Carolina, because that's where the congressman who helped make that happen is from. So at Norfolk State, right now, there are some linkages that have taken place today and in the past between Norfolk State and Booker T. So to me, it's a matter of us revisiting and strengthening those relationships. In disclosure, I've shared before, I'm on the Norfolk State University Research and Innovation Foundation that's looking at the entire cybersecurity, and previously had set up an opportunity for Dr. Boone to talk to the provost there. So those types of meetings and those types of conversations would need to occur, but this would just give a frame versus if we said we want to be able to move at a pace. I just feel like we've got to give some framework, and all I was trying to do is say, here's a framework to work in, because still the principal and the staff and the community all have to be engaged with something. So, to me, it's not very different than when we stood up the Academy for Discovery, and then, they had a team of parents and stakeholders that worked. But however that gets implemented would be for the administration to figure out. We would just be providing a framework and guidance for them to go and work on it.
And if I could add, Go Virginia just published recently, there are 3 things that this Region 5, they say needs to have happen. One of them is stronger workforce readiness. So I feel like we can't do enough
Enough.
to support that at all 5 of our high schools.
Correct.
So to say cyber's at Booker T, cyber should be everywhere. Cyber should be at CT, cyber should be.
Yeah.
So it's not mutually exclusive, but I think as we lift all boats, we will help with that workforce readiness at all high schools, to be
Correct.
honest. So we just know that as a region, we're falling behind in terms of that. So I think if we can do our part to prepare our students that way, we will go a long way. So I'm thrilled with the Booker T, I'm thrilled with the CTE. We are
Yeah.
definitely doing it, and I think the pace, moving as quickly as possible is the way to do it.
Yes.
Ms. Basine, good.
Well, my questions were along the same lines as Dr. Robinson's, but then to get back to Ms. Wagner's point about, so what, I know right now you have to go and process, what we've provided
I
tonight.
received the memo when you all did. so.
Yeah, right. But I mean, in terms of timelines, to address, the concerns that were raised about putting the CTE, marketing that ahead of Booker T, and how that, what do you see? So now, it's pretty clear that we're supportive of that, the Booker T piece. So what do you see as the next step?
Well-
When you say, excuse me, when you say marketing ahead, can you just clarify?
Well,
I think we
'cause-
said that, we were gonna be doing it simultaneous.
Right, so,
So why would one be ahead of the other?
well, then we have 2 months to get information around Booker T.
Oh, you mean in terms of
I'm
if we
talking
were
about
doing
Booker
something
T,
for?
yeah. Are we going to realistically be able to do those simultaneously?
When I'm hearing the conversation, I'm thinking of all of the things that we need to have for us at the January work session.
Right, yeah.
So I'm thinking of the timetables, the benchmarks, the budget,
Right.
all of this that we're gonna need to have in order to,
Yeah, well,
Well,
that's
and
the
let me be
point.
clear. January 3rd is the budget,
The next-
is the next
right.
work session. We won't have this.
Right.
So then we're gonna have to
That's why I'm
figure
asking
out
this
where
question.
this is gonna be, maybe.
Okay,
Not gonna-
you go ahead, because
Yeah.
So another way to think about this is we're strengthening, the board's desire, my desire is to strengthen the current academic and program and curricular offerings at Booker T. A lot of that is about the current students that are there, in addition to students who may want to opt into this program. So one of the things we will probably have to do, because we aren't ready to launch this yet, is have a separate application process should there be any students from outside the current Booker T attendance zone that will want to be part of some of these opportunities. We certainly have some arts things that are going on, not saying that that's all we're going to bring forward, but you know Booker T has a very strong strings program, so there are some investments that we made. So we've got to bring the arts coordinator, the visual arts, the performing arts, music coordinators to the table. We've got to bring a lot of folks to the table to take this from conceptualization to what it could be in reality. That will take some time, but I think through this process, we will be able to figure out what are pieces of it that will be ready to launch in the fall, and what are pieces that may be ready for the fall of 19.
Right.
Because if there are any courses that we need that don't currently have curricular focus, then we have to develop that. Much of what's in the STEM field that are CTE courses, the state is already working on those. We've been a part of some of the development of those, and those are ready to go forward. And so that's why the pilot year with the IT Academy at Lake Taylor High School makes sense, because of additional curriculum and courses that will be ready for 19. So there are some pieces of this that we can identify what's shelf ready, if you will, or shovel ready, and what will need to be developed and what would it look like, you know, over time. But we need to also, so yes, we would have to see this first year, do we do some choice seats for this program for the first year? Do we do choice seats in the second year of the program? These are all questions that we have to come to the table and respectfully have to have enough time to have some discussions about. There's no way we can deliver that in the next 2 weeks.
right, and just for clarity, you know, we always talk about, our role above the line and below the line. So even as I was putting the memo together, you all got the short version, okay? So the long version was way below the line. But the idea was that I thought that if we would make the designation, and then as we go through the budget process and go through the public hearing process, then we can then begin to form processes to then support that, following the recommendations of the administration. If we don't do something, if we didn't make at least a designation, then I would see it falling farther and farther behind and never being able to catch up. So just as with as this year, the administration made the recommendation to do the pilot at Lake Taylor, that might be something that emerged. We know right now that there are summer cyber camps that are out there. So who's to say that something couldn't be done around Booker T with the existing enrollment? I wasn't even thinking about the whole choice thing. I was just thinking about support at the existing school with whoever's in that school right now, and begin to do some planning like we did with ADL, do some piloting like we did with the Lake Taylor and the CTE, and then the administration has to help guide us with that. But at least as we go forward to the public and as we go forward to council and to the state and to the private sector to ask for support for all these things that we're doing, we can say to those, yes, we are looking at cybersecurity and performing arts at Booker T, and we know we have things that we're going to do at the CTE school. And yes, we want to strengthen the IB program at Granby and enhance what we're doing with EVMS at Maury, and engineering at Norview, and then the military science, I think, still is a part of somewhere.
All of our
All of
schools
us.
have
So,
some military
so all those things, but at least it allows us to make our case
Tangibly.
tangibly to council, to our public and to anyone who says that they want to see what our plan is for growing the work and academic excellence at Norfolk Public Schools. So that's that. Dr. Gabriel.
When we have our retreat on the specialty program, I remember Dr. Boone at the last meeting, you had mentioned something about an IB program or needing to think about the various folks who would be coming through the IB pipeline. So when you are looking at this option for Booker T in consideration, if you do have recommendations as far as IB and the feeder pattern for that, please feel free to share it with us as well, because
This
I remember you
consensus,
had,
just put that on the back burner. No way that we can get to that in
right,
concert with the STEAM proposal, which is a great proposal. So we won't be ready for any recommendations around that. We'll need to deal with the IB situation separate from the Booker T. That was my attempt at bringing a frame to what a specialty option could be for Booker T. If, with the STEAM frame, I think we need to develop that. It doesn't mean that IB could not, that could not also be an IB site, but at this point, we need to develop a frame very well
right.
with a fidelity of implementation rather than trying to do several things and none of them get done well.
All right, other thoughts, questions at this time? So let's just kind of see if y'all can help me recap. So it seems we have some consensus and direction around option 2 and 3 or some hybrid thereof for additional consideration as far as Lake Taylor and the CTE. We've offered up a STEAM framework for Booker T, pending review and consideration that we'll have further discussion around in January in the coming meetings. The Camp Allen Sewell's Point piece is something that's not going to take action in terms of a vote in January, but would be a part of further discussion in late spring. And likewise, any of the recommendations as far as looking at Harbor Halls and
Lake
Fairlawn
Taylor.
and Lake Taylor Middle K-8. All right. Okay. Anything else that we need to
No, I think that's
consider at this point, Ms. Bassine?
I just wanted to clarify, since you, in your recap, talked about option 2 and 3, I feel like I heard pretty much I didn't hear 3 as really being something that any of us were advocating for.
I actually think it might be more than 2 and 4, but it was a hybrid. It was a hybrid of a geographical zone and choice. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, but this was the program feeder, that's
Right,
why I
and
was-
so that's
yeah.
where we look at.
Program could be in choice.
Right, but the
Okay.
option 4, which is the geographic boundary and program feeder, had some different figured numbers that
Okay.
I don't think,
Okay.
that's why I didn't
Okay,
bring that one.
all right.
That's why I
Yeah,
said
yeah, I didn't want that.
somewhere between
Yeah.
2 and 3.
Okay.
Dr. Robinson?
I would hope with our other needs, and since we're pushing some of these implementations until the 20 school year, basically, I'd hope we'd have some more information on some consolidations and recommendations because of our facilities.
Well, I think, Dr. Robinson, we've presented, based on our current and future enrollment projections, what we think the capacity real estate would look like for us. And, you know, we know that we can't exist with 4 high schools, so we can't take one high school totally off the picture. So we check that piece. With the middle school piece, again, there would be withdrawing new boundaries for Lake Taylor Middle School, that would impact middle school feeder patterns, as well as deal with the excess capacity that we have at middle schools. So, that's one way to think about the Lake Taylor Middle. As far as, and the rest of the schools, as Tracy shared, and we have affirmed throughout time too, our elementary schools are pretty much at capacity. We really don't have a great deal of excess seats at our elementary. And so, at this point, unless there's new construction or something that, would address a smaller school, something, I really don't see where we would be I would be recommending to the board additional consolidations at this point. Should one of the things that we've looked in the enrollment forecasting, along with Tracy Richter, is that we think we've hit another one of those plateau levels, and that we shouldn't see the precipitous drops that we've seen for the last 3 to 5 years. And if that's truly stabilized, then we should be in that holding pattern. And we think the set of recommendations that we've been focused on will get us to a point of what we can handle. But our elementary schools just don't have a lot of excess capacity. One of the goals through some of the work, like with the Camp Allen, Sewell's Point, would help us to be able to reduce mobile units at Fairlawn. Long
Both.
School. Sewell's Point will help us to be able to reduce mobile units there. Obviously, when you look at the Facility Condition Index report, we have a lot of needs in terms of keeping schools viable that have, good enrollments. And so how do we address that? So, last point, we still do have the issue of our separate pre-K facilities, and, Willoughby has additional capacity. We lost 14 pre-K classes when, the state reduced us 250 positions in VPI. And so, at some point, we'll be wanting to have further conversation with the board around how do we address pre-K on that end of the city, because, we don't have it.
Yeah, we need to think outside the box on that one. That school's sitting there half empty and falling apart.
$10,000 chiller.
Ms. Doyle?
I was going to bring up actually the Willoughby School, but then also with this reconfiguration of schools and programs, we are going to have buildings that will not be utilized anymore. And I know we have some right now that aren't. For instance, we have Coronado. And I know we're looking at what we're going to do with our CSEP groups. So that's something I think we need to continue the conversation of what buildings, therefore, as a result, we don't need anymore, that we turn back to the city, that they can then use for whatever purpose, but that we're not paying the maintenance on. So the whole idea of this also was that we were reducing costs where we didn't need to spend through this realignment.
Exactly. One of the reasons that we haven't brought back to the board a disposition of Coronado yet, we were trying to see, is that a place where we could do some district-wide professional development? Rather than, we don't have any schools with large conference centers and things that we could utilize. So that's something we've been looking at. We're going to be sooner than later coming back to the board with that, a recommendation, either to maintain it for that purpose or to release it back to the city. The condition of Madison still remains, and, in the proposal around the K-8,
Right.
we potentially could repurpose a building and take Madison offline. So a lot of these things, it begins that domino effect. Obviously, with Poplar Halls, we've talked about that having a poor facility condition index.
Exactly.
K-8 or some other option would allow us to take that school offline. We also have safety concerns, as we've often talked, that when that school was built, we obviously didn't have an on-ramp to Interstate 264, and yet the playground is right there at that on-ramp. So that always worries us. So I think there are some opportunities as we deal with this phase of planning. Beyond that, when we get a facility to match the vision of the comprehensive CTE school, that could potentially free up NTC and property. So there are some options around. But not all of them are immediate, some are contingent upon other decisions and how we advance that.
Yeah, I just want to kind of keep that front and center as well, because that is not lost on any of us, that in fact, we can reduce maintenance expenses that could be used then for otherwise in other needs of a division.
With the general operating costs,
Exactly,
or where we save.
right.
Okay. Anything else on this topic at this time? Anything else related as far as the workshop is concerned at this time that is better addressed here versus during the business meeting? So hearing none, then we'll bring the workshop to a close, and I will accept them. First of all, thank you. And thank everybody for all the work. I know it's a lot of information that we've received, and just like we said for the public, that members of the public can continue to send us questions and comments. Obviously, members of the board can do the same. So I know you all will be like me and be working on this over the holidays. So just teasing. In any event, but thank you for all the work and time, because I know it takes a lot of effort to digest this and do what we just did today. The other thing I don't want to miss, Dr. Boone, that I mentioned earlier that Dr. Robinson also brought to our attention in that January time frame, just getting a better understanding of any of the cleanup boundary changes that are also embedded in this that may not be obvious to us. I think it's important that we be able to see those things too as we move towards making some votes. So with Dr. Robinson.
I would just like to request that at the work session, that we have blown-up maps of the proposed changes that we made, including the streets.
Yeah, just so we can really get a good feel for what's there.
Hear what's going on.
Is there a motion for us to go into a closed session?
I move that we go to closed session.
All right, so second. All right. Moved by Reverend Haywood, second by Ms. Doyle. Ms. Banks?
Thank you. It has been moved that the members of the school board and council go into a closed session for the purposes which are set out in subsection A of section 2.2-3711 of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act as amended for the discussion or consideration of prospective candidates for employment, assignment, appointment, promotion, performance, demotion, salaries, disciplining, or resignation of specific officers, appointees, or employees of the Norfolk Public Schools, including consideration of the personnel docket of this date, and possible revisions to the employment contract of the superintendent pursuant to subsection 1 of the above-cited code section, for the discussion or consideration of disciplinary matters and other matters concerning students in Norfolk Public Schools that would involve the disclosure of information contained in the scholastic record pursuant to subsection 2 of the above-cited code section, including the pupil personnel docket of this date, and for consultation with legal counsel and briefings by staff members, consultants, or attorneys pertaining to actual or probable litigation or other specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by counsel. The substance of this section of the motion refers to the advice of counsel regarding legal issues related to the personnel and student support actions identified above pursuant to subsections 7 and 8 of the above-cited code section. Ms. Basine?
Aye.
Ms. Doyle?
Aye.
Dr. Gabriel?
Aye.
Reverend Haywood?
Aye.
Dr. Robinson?
Aye.
Ms. Wagner? Mr. Jordan?
All right. So, Ms. Banks, is dinner ready? Okay, so let's grab a dinner plate and we can do that over closed session. So let's say 5:30, if we can convene by 5:30.